The Nike story, the dream that defeated giants. There are companies that sell products, there are companies that build brands, and then there are companies that change the way the world thinks. Nike belongs to the third category. Today, its famous swoosh logo is recognized in almost every country on Earth. It appears on Olympic podiums, NBA courts, football stadiums, marathon finish lines, and city streets. Every year, hundreds of millions of people buy Nike products without ever thinking about how the company began. Most people assume Nike was created by wealthy investors with a brilliant business plan. They couldn't be more wrong. The company that would one day become one of the most valuable brands in history started with an impossible dream, borrowed money, and a young man who refused to accept that the world's biggest companies were unbeatable. His name was Phil Knight, and for years he looked nothing like the entrepreneur the world would later admire. He wasn't born into extraordinary wealth. He wasn't a marketing genius. He wasn't a famous athlete. He was simply a runner who saw an opportunity everyone else ignored. In the early 1960s, the global sports shoe market belonged to Germany. Two companies stood above everyone else: Adidas, Puma. Their shoes were worn by world champions, Olympic medalists, and professional athletes across the globe. If you wanted the best running shoes, there was almost no alternative. American companies couldn't compete. Most experts believed that would never change. Phil Knight wasn't convinced. While studying business at Stanford University, he became fascinated by Japan's rapidly growing manufacturing industry. Japanese cameras were beginning to challenge German cameras. Japanese cars were improving every year. Factories in Japan were producing products with remarkable quality at prices that shocked competitors. Phil asked himself a simple question. If Japan could challenge Germany in electronics and automobiles, why couldn't it do the same in athletic shoes? That single question would change his life forever. For one of his business assignments, he wrote a paper arguing that high-quality Japanese running shoes could eventually compete with German brands. To his classmates, it was just another academic project. To Phil Knight, it became an obsession. After graduating, he faced a choice: find a stable job, build a comfortable life, forget the crazy idea, or take a risk that could end in complete failure. Most people choose certainty. Phil chose uncertainty. In 1962, carrying little more than ambition and curiosity, he boarded a plane to Japan. He didn't own a company. He had no employees, no office, no reputation. He didn't even have permission to represent a business. Yet, he was about to walk into a meeting with one of Japan's leading shoe manufacturers and convince them that he could sell their products in America. Looking back, it sounds impossible. At the time, it almost was. When Phil arrived in Kobe, he visited the headquarters of Onitsuka Company, the company behind the Tiger running shoes. The executives welcomed the young American visitor. Then came the question he had been dreading. "What company do you represent?" For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Phil didn't have a company. He had never sold a single pair of shoes. He had no warehouse, no distribution network. Nothing. Most people would have admitted the truth. Phil Knight made a decision that changed business history. Without planning it, he invented one. "Blue Ribbon Sports," he replied confidently. The name simply came into his mind. At that moment, Blue Ribbon Sports existed only in his imagination. But by the end of that meeting, it had something incredibly valuable: an opportunity. Phil convinced Onitsuka to let his company distribute Tiger running shoes in the United States. He left Japan carrying something far more important than a signed agreement. He carried proof that impossible dreams sometimes begin with impossible confidence. Back home in Oregon, reality quickly returned. There was still no office, no employees, no inventory, and almost no money. Phil continued working as an accountant during the day. At night, he planned the future of Blue Ribbon Sports, but he couldn't build the company alone. He needed someone who understood runners better than anyone else, There was only one person he trusted, his former track coach, Bill Bowerman. Bill Bowerman wasn't just a coach. He was obsessed, not with winning medals, not with fame. He was obsessed with one question. How can I make runners faster? Every race taught him something. Every training session became an experiment. Every pair of shoes was a problem waiting to be solved. While other coaches focused on stronger athletes, Bowerman focused on better equipment. He would cut shoes apart, remove layers, replace materials, glue pieces together. Sometimes he completely destroyed a perfectly good pair of running shoes just to understand why one runner finished a fraction of a second behind another. To most people, he looked eccentric. To Phil Knight, he looked like the perfect business partner. When Phil explained the agreement he had made in Japan, Bowerman immediately understood the opportunity. America desperately needed better running shoes, not expensive luxury products, but lightweight, high-performance shoes that ordinary athletes could actually afford. The two men shook hands. One understood business, the other understood athletes. Together, they formed a partnership that neither of them realized would change sports forever. Blue Ribbon Sports officially came to life. There was no impressive headquarters, no expensive warehouse, no advertising department, no investors writing million-dollar checks. The company's first office was something far less glamorous. Phil Knight's parents' house. The inventory was stacked wherever there was space. The paperwork covered kitchen tables, and the company car became a mobile shoe store. Every weekend, Phil loaded the trunk with Tiger running shoes and drove hundreds of miles across Oregon and California. Instead of selling shoes inside shopping malls, he sold them in parking lots, outside college track meets, near high school competitions, anywhere runners gathered. He would open the trunk of his car, line up the shoes, and begin talking to athletes one by one. He wasn't acting like a salesman. He was asking questions. How do they feel? Where does your foot hurt? Would you change anything? Most companies spent millions on market research. Phil Knight received his feedback for free, directly from the people wearing the shoes. Those conversations became one of Blue Ribbon Sports' greatest competitive advantages. Every complaint became an improvement. Every compliment confirmed they were moving in the right direction. Sales slowly increased, not because of flashy advertising, but because runners trusted runners. One satisfied athlete recommended the shoes to a teammate. That teammate recommended them to another. The company wasn't growing because of marketing. It was growing because of reputation. Then something unexpected happened. Bill Bowerman couldn't stop thinking about better shoes. Even though Tiger shoes were good, he believed they could be even better. He began sketching new designs, experimenting with lighter soles, testing different materials, sending ideas to Japan. Some were accepted, many were ignored. Bowerman became frustrated. He wanted innovation. The manufacturer wanted consistency. At first, the disagreement seemed small, but year after year, it became impossible to ignore. Phil Knight found himself caught between two worlds. On one side stood Onitsuka, the Japanese company that had given Blue Ribbon Sports its first opportunity. On the other stood Bill Bowerman, the man who wanted to reinvent the running shoe from the ground up. For a while, Phil believed both relationships could survive. He was wrong. Behind closed doors, trust was beginning to disappear. Contracts became more complicated. Conversations became colder. Rumors spread that Onitsuka was looking for other American distributors. For Blue Ribbon Sports, this wasn't just bad news. It was an existential threat. The company had built its entire business around selling Tiger shoes. If that partnership ended, Blue Ribbon Sports would have nothing left to sell. Years of work, thousands of customers, and Phil Knight's dream could disappear almost overnight. Most entrepreneurs would have fought to save the partnership. Phil Knight started asking a different question. What if we stop selling someone else's dream and finally build our own? That single decision would become the turning point not only for Blue Ribbon Sports, but for the entire sports industry. For the first time, Phil Knight wasn't thinking about distributing shoes. He was thinking about creating a brand the world would never forget. The late 1960s became the most dangerous period in Phil Knight's life. From the outside, Blue Ribbon Sports looked successful. Sales were growing. More runners were wearing Tiger shoes. Track coaches were recommending the brand. But behind the scenes, the company was living on the edge. Almost every dollar that came in went right back out. Phil wasn't building a cash-rich business. He was building a fast-growing business. And those are two very different things. Every shipment from Japan had to be paid for before it could be sold. The more shoes customers wanted, the more money the company needed. Growth wasn't solving the problem. It was making the problem bigger. Banks looked at Blue Ribbon Sports and saw risk. To them, it was a tiny company with almost no assets. Phil spent countless hours sitting across from loan officers trying to explain why he needed even more money. Most of them didn't understand. Some rejected him immediately. Others questioned whether selling running shoes could ever become a serious business. Each time he walked out of another bank, he wondered if the company had reached the end. Years later, Phil Knight admitted that he often felt like he was only 30 days away from bankruptcy. One delayed shipment, one canceled loan, one unexpected mistake could destroy everything. Yet every morning, he went back to work. Not because success was guaranteed, but because quitting was unthinkable. Then another challenge appeared. The relationship with Onitsuka continued to deteriorate. Meetings became tense. Letters took longer to receive answers. Promises slowly disappeared. Phil began hearing rumors that Onitsuka wanted to replace Blue Ribbon Sports with another American distributor. If those rumors were true, everything they had built could vanish overnight, instead of waiting for disaster. Phil and Bowerman began preparing for life after Tiger. For months, they worked in secret, sketching ideas, testing materials, imagining shoes that didn't exist yet. They weren't trying to copy Adidas. They weren't trying to copy Tiger. They wanted something entirely different, a shoe designed by runners, for runners. But there was one major problem. Every great company needs a great name. Blue Ribbon Sports was a distributor. It wasn't a global brand. If they were going to create their own future, they needed a new identity. Dozens of names were discussed. Most were forgettable. Some sounded awkward. Others simply didn't feel right. Time was running out. The first production run was already approaching. Boxes needed to be printed. Labels had to be manufactured. The deadline was only days away. Then, one morning, a phone call changed everything. Jeff Johnson, Blue Ribbon Sports' first full-time employee, called Phil Knight with an unusual story. He said he had dreamed about a single word, Nike, named after the ancient Greek goddess of victory. Short, powerful, easy to remember. Phil wasn't completely convinced. He preferred other names. But there was no time left. The factory needed an answer. Reluctantly, he agreed. No one in that room realized they had just chosen one of the most recognizable names in business history. The company had a name, but it still had no logo. Without a symbol, Nike would be just another word printed on a shoebox. Phil turned to a young graphic design student at Portland State University. Her name was Carolyn Davidson. She wasn't a famous designer. She wasn't working for a major agency. She was simply trying to earn extra money while attending college. Phil explained that he needed a logo that represented movement, speed, energy, victory. Davidson worked through several ideas before presenting a simple curved mark. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't complicated. In fact, Phil's first reaction was disappointing. "I don't love it," he admitted, "but maybe it will grow on me." He paid Carolyn just $35 for the design. $35. A logo that would eventually become one of the most valuable visual identities ever created was purchased for less than the price of a pair of premium sneakers today. Sometimes, history doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it quietly begins with a pencil sketch, a small payment, and a decision that almost no one notices. Nike finally had a name. Nike finally had a face. Now, it needed something even harder, a reason for the world to care. For years, Nike fought simply to survive. The company finally had its own shoes, its own logo, its own identity, but having a product and building a global brand were two completely different challenges. Adidas was still the king of the industry. Its athletes dominated international competitions. Its reputation stretched across every continent. Compared to Adidas, Nike was barely visible. Phil Knight knew he couldn't outspend the giants, so he decided to outthink them. Instead of focusing only on professional champions, Nike focused on runners, real runners, college athletes, weekend joggers, people chasing personal records instead of Olympic medals. It was a market the biggest brands had largely ignored. Then Bill Bowerman made a discovery that would become part of company legend. One morning while eating breakfast, he stared at his wife's waffle iron. Most people would have seen a kitchen appliance. Bowerman saw a shoe sole. He noticed the square waffle pattern and began imagining how it could grip a running track while remaining incredibly light. The idea sounded ridiculous, but Bowerman had never been afraid of ridiculous ideas. Without asking permission, he poured liquid rubber directly into the family waffle iron. The experiment was a disaster. Rubber overflowed everywhere. The waffle iron was ruined. His wife wasn't exactly thrilled, but when the rubber cooled, Bowerman held something remarkable in his hands. A completely different type of running sole. Lighter, more flexible, with superior traction. That strange kitchen experiment became the foundation for one of Nike's earliest breakthroughs. Sometimes, innovation isn't born inside billion-dollar laboratories. Sometimes, it begins in someone's kitchen. As Nike's shoes improved, so did its reputation. Track athletes started talking, coaches started paying attention. Orders slowly increased. But Phil Knight understood something that many entrepreneurs never realize. A great product alone doesn't create a legendary brand. Stories do. People rarely fall in love with companies. They fall in love with what those companies represent. Nike wasn't selling rubber, leather, or shoelaces. It was selling ambition, discipline, courage, the belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. That message resonated with an entire generation. By the late 1970s, Nike was no longer just another shoe company. It had become a movement. Then came one of the biggest moments in its history. In 1980, Nike went public. The company's shares began trading on the stock market. Employees who had spent years working under constant pressure suddenly found themselves holding valuable stock. Many became millionaires. Phil Knight had finally built a successful business. At least, that's what everyone believed. Because just when success seemed guaranteed, Nike walked straight into another crisis. Sales slowed, fashion changed, aerobics exploded in popularity. A new competitor understood the market better than anyone else. That company was Reebok. Within a few years, Reebok had captured the attention of millions of consumers, especially women, with stylish fitness shoes. Nike had underestimated the shift. For the first time in years, the company wasn't leading. It was falling behind. Market share dropped. Confidence weakened. Analysts began asking the same question. Has Nike already reached its peak? Inside headquarters, the pressure was enormous. Some executives wanted to play it safe. Others wanted to cut costs. Phil Knight believed neither option would save the company. He knew Nike didn't need a small improvement. It needed a defining moment, a moment so powerful that the entire world would look at the swoosh in a completely different way. That moment would arrive in 1984, and its name was Michael Jordan. In 1984, Michael Jordan wasn't the greatest basketball player in the world. Not yet. He was a young rookie entering the NBA, talented, confident, full of potential. But there was one problem. He didn't want to sign with Nike. Jordan admired Adidas. That was the company he dreamed of wearing. Nike wasn't even his second choice. At the time, many basketball players viewed Nike as a running shoe company. Basketball wasn't its identity. Inside Nike headquarters, opinions were divided. Some executives believed spending millions on one rookie was reckless. No rookie had ever proven he could change an entire business. If Jordan failed, the investment would become one of the biggest mistakes in company history. But one man saw something different. Sonny Vaccaro, Nike's basketball marketing strategist. He wasn't looking at statistics. He wasn't looking at championships. He was looking at personality, confidence, competitiveness, the ability to inspire millions. Vaccaro believed Michael Jordan wasn't simply another player. He believed Jordan could become the future of basketball itself. There was only one obstacle. Jordan had almost no interest in meeting Nike. His family convinced him to attend the meeting anyway. That single decision changed sports marketing forever. Instead of offering Michael Jordan a standard endorsement deal, Nike offered something almost unheard of: his own signature shoe, his own brand, his own future. It was an enormous gamble. Most companies promoted the brand first and the athlete second. Nike reversed the formula. They decided to build the brand around the athlete. Jordan accepted. The agreement was worth about $2.5 million over 5 years, plus royalties, a bold commitment for a rookie at the time. Then came the shoes. They were called Air Jordan. There was one problem. The NBA's uniform rules limited what colors players could wear on the court, and the original black and red Air Jordan design became the center of controversy. Instead of hiding from the attention, Nike embraced it. The company turned the controversy into one of the most talked about marketing moments in sports. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the shoes. Teenagers wanted them. Collectors wanted them. Basketball fans wanted them. People who had never watched an NBA game wanted them. Nike had discovered something extraordinary. It wasn't just selling athletic performance anymore. It was selling identity. Owning a pair of Air Jordans wasn't simply about playing basketball. It meant belonging to something bigger. When the first year's sales were projected internally, expectations were modest. The actual demand shattered them. Air Jordan generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue far faster than almost anyone had imagined. The partnership transformed both sides. Michael Jordan became one of the greatest athletes in history. Nike became the dominant force in basketball. But Phil Knight understood something important. One successful product could make a company famous. Only a powerful philosophy could make it timeless. Nike needed a message, one sentence, that every athlete, professional or amateur, could believe in. A message that wasn't about shoes. It was about courage, about taking the first step, about acting despite fear. That message would soon become one of the most famous slogans ever created. 3 simple words: just do it. Those 3 words didn't describe a product. They described a mindset. In 1988, Nike launched the Just Do It campaign. The company wasn't talking only to elite athletes anymore. It was speaking to everyone, to the person running their very first mile, to the teenager chasing a dream, to the father trying to get back in shape, to the woman training before sunrise while the rest of the city was still asleep. Nike's message was simple. Greatness isn't reserved for champions. It belongs to anyone willing to begin. The campaign changed advertising forever. Instead of focusing on shoes, Nike focused on emotion. Instead of showing products, it showed determination, pain, failure, hope, triumph. The swoosh became more than a logo. It became a symbol of possibility. Sales exploded. The brand expanded beyond running and basketball, football, tennis, golf, training, lifestyle. One by one, the world's biggest athletes joined Nike: Tiger Woods, Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, Ronaldo Nazario. Later came Cristiano Ronaldo, LeBron James, Serena Williams, Kobe Bryant, and many others. Each athlete brought new fans, but the message never changed. Don't wait. Don't make excuses. Just do it. By the 1990s, Nike had become one of the most influential brands on earth. Yet success brought new challenges. The company faced criticism over labor practices in parts of its global supply chain. Consumers, journalists, and activists questioned how some products were being manufactured. For the first time, Nike's reputation was under pressure for reasons that had nothing to do with sports. Many companies would have stayed silent. Nike eventually responded by increasing transparency, publishing supplier information, strengthening oversight, and introducing higher labor and environmental standards across much of its supply chain. The criticism was painful, but it forced the company to change. Phil Knight later acknowledged that protecting a brand required more than creating great products. It required earning public trust. The lesson was expensive, but unforgettable. As the years passed, Nike continued investing in innovation, lighter materials, air cushioning, fly-knit technology, digital fitness, direct-to-consumer retail. The company adapted again and again, while many former rivals struggled to keep pace. The world changed, consumer habits changed, technology changed, Nike changed with them. That ability to evolve without losing its identity became one of its greatest strengths. Today, the swoosh appears in nearly every corner of the world. Its products are worn by Olympic champions, school children, weekend runners, and people who have never played a competitive sport. The company generates tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. Its brand is worth far more than shoes alone. It represents ambition, resilience, belief. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is how it all began. Not with billions of dollars, not with a perfect business plan, not with certainty. It began with one young man carrying an impossible idea onto a plane bound for Japan. A coach who believed a runner could become faster by changing a shoe. A designer who created one of history's most recognizable logos for just $35. A rookie basketball player who took a chance on a company that wasn't yet the biggest name in the game. History rarely changes because people follow the safest path. It changes because someone chooses to take the risk that everyone else avoids. Phil Knight never promised himself that he would succeed. He promised himself that he would try. And sometimes, that is the only difference between an ordinary life and a legacy that changes the world forever. This wasn't just the story of Nike. It was the story of vision over comfort, courage over certainty, persistence over fear. Because every great empire begins the same way, with one person who decides to take the first step.